So thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about how you can transfer ownership for the various systems, both within GW and external to GW, that are sort of working in concert to manage your online digital presence. So really talking about some of the most common ones that where you might need that managerial access transferred when your main web person or marketing manager leaves their role. So website services, web-based applications, and then some of the common external services. So first, looking at web-based services, GW offers several in-house website hosting and publishing services, and each one has its own requirements for account management, and that is GW Drupal, GW Blogs, the DubDub2 server, and then the CAD server. So GW Drupal is the main content management system at GW for academic and administrative websites, and the office that manages access to a given website is actually the site owner. So for example, here you can see the Elliott School of International Affairs homepage. The web team within Elliott School is actually who will manage back-end access to that website. So a lot of times people will come to us and say, hey, I need to make an edit on such and such page on the Elliott School website, and we have to let them know you have to reach out directly to the Elliott School. We don't have authority to just give someone back-end access just because they request it. There's a team within Elliott that manages the content and manages back-end access to the site, so you'll need to reach out to them. And that's the case for all GW Drupal websites. You'll want to reach out to whoever's website that you're actually on. So if you're on the campus advisory, well, nobody should access campus advisories but that team. But let's say you're looking at the website for a given institute or a center, an academic program, whatever the case might be. Don't necessarily reach out to us. Look in the footer of that website, or look to see if there's a contact page and reach out to them via that way to say, hey, I wanted to get back-end access for whatever the case might be. Maybe you have a legitimate reason for needing it, or maybe you just wanted to make a little tweak, and they can actually work with you on making whatever that edit needs to be. But you need to reach out to the site owner to get back-end access. They are the ones who will vet the request and approve it or decline it as necessary. The one exception to this rule, sorry, I forgot the word, is sites that fall under the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences. Back-end access for all CCAS websites is actually managed by their Office of Technology Services. So you would have to reach out directly to Columbian College's OTS office to get back-end access to those sites. Otherwise, you'll need to, as I mentioned previously, for any other website, reach out to you're looking specifically for the site administrator for a given website to be given back-end editorial access to that website. But for Columbian websites, you'll need to reach out to the Office of Technology Services, and they will provide access as necessary. And again, that contact method will vary, but it's typically going to be a contact page on the website or some contact information in the footer that you can access to reach out to whoever that person is. So GW Blogs is another website hosting platform at the university. These are self-serve websites, so really our office just, as far as our involvement goes, will turn on access to a website, and then after that it's completely on the site owner and in their hands from that point on, and the site owner, just like with Drupal, will be the one to manage back-end access to that site. So for example, again speaking on Columbian, they have their Office of Communications and Marketing website on the platform, and it's managed internally by that team. So if I, as a CCAS staff member, come along and say I need back-end access to this website for whatever reason, I need to reach out to the Office of Communications and Marketing team to ask them to give me that access. You could reach out to our office, but we would just forward that along to that team for them to actually manage the request. So you're looking for the administrator within that office for that specific website to give you back-end access at whatever level is appropriate. And for that contact information, just like with Drupal, there's typically going to be a contact page on the website that you'll want to locate to find an email address or a phone number to request that access. So next, looking at DubDub2 sites. DubDub2 is a legacy server at the university. It's been around since like the 90s, I believe. And it's pretty old school, where it's literally just server space, which you would access via an FTP client. And you can see in the screenshot here an example of one called FileZilla. From there, whoever is managing the website would do so typically with a web editing program like Dreamweaver, to be able to manage the HTML and CSS and whatnot of that website. So access to a given WWW2 site is managed by GW Information Technology. You'll want to contact the IT Support Center, which you can do by going to it.gwu.edu and submitting a ticket. You can also send an email to ithelp@gwu.edu and submit a ticket that way. And then finally, you can also call them directly at 202-994-4948 and submit an IT support ticket that way. When you reach out to them, you're going to want to request to have the password on the account for that given site reset, and then you'll also want them to confirm whose net ID is associated with the account and potentially ask them to update it. If it's for an employee who's no longer in that role or no longer at the university, you'll need to have them update the associated net ID with a current employee who should be managing that website. But again, it's just server space. IT does not do content edits on those websites. Our office also does not do content edits. That's completely the responsibility of the office that owns the site. And you will need to use an FTP client to actually gain access to the files for the website and to make any content edits as necessary using a program like Dreamweaver, as I mentioned before. Moving on to CAD Sites, just like with the DubDub2 sites, this is also a legacy server, which I believe has been around since about the 90s. For both those services, I should mention, they no longer create new accounts. They only allow existing accounts to continue existing, but obviously as newer technologies are available and being taken advantage of, if these sites can be turned off and those accounts deleted, they do prefer to do that. But again, they will not create new accounts on either one of these servers. With the ACAD server sites, these are managed by the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, and I believe at this point these are only faculty CV sites. I do not believe there are any academic or administrative websites on this server at this point. If you need to have a given site reassigned to somebody, you'll need to submit an OTS support ticket. So you would go to ots.columbian.gwu.edu, and you would need to actually request to have a clone of the old site created, and for that clone to be assigned to your net ID instead of the previous employee. It's a pretty uncommon thing to ask because, again, these are faculty CV sites. So really, once that person is no longer at the university, that website should really just come down and no longer exist. It shouldn't really be an issue of reassigning it to somebody else. But if you needed to, for whatever reason, you would have to actually request to have a clone of the old site created and assigned to the current employee's net ID. And just like with DubDub2, you'll need to have an FTP client to access the website files, and a program such as Dreamweaver to actually make edits to the HTML, CSS, so on and so forth. So next, talking about web-based applications and services, there are some within GW, and these are typically all used to kind of augment either your websites or your online administrative operations. And some of these are actually third-party vendor-based as well. So with GoURL, these are used to create short links, typically for marketing purposes. So if your website address is kind of long as far as characters go, and you don't want to use that for a marketing campaign, or if you have a character limit on a marketing campaign of some sort, GoURL is a service available to all current faculty, staff, and students to create short links that will start with go.gwu.edu/ and then whatever you want that last part to be. If there is a GoURL out there that you need to have reassigned, because the person who maybe was managing it before is no longer in that role, the process is actually co-managed by my team, Marketing and Creative Services, as well as GW Information Technology. What my office does is we will vet the request. Our policy is that we do not reassign GoURLs that are owned by active employees or staff, if the case may be. So what my office does is if somebody reaches out and says, we need to have access to this Go URL reassigned to us, we'll reach out to whoever that current faculty or staff member is who owns it to get their approval first. However, if you're requesting to have one reassigned because that person is no longer at the university, then we'll submit the IT ticket on your behalf and get that process going. If by chance you submit the ticket to IT instead of reaching out to us first, they're actually just going to assign it to us anyway, and we'll still go through the process of making sure that it doesn't belong to a current faculty or staff member. If it does not, approving the request, and then it will proceed as necessary. If it does, we'll reach out to the person who owns it currently to see if they approve of having it reassigned to somebody within your office instead. So to initiate this process, you'll want to email us at onlinestrategy@gw.edu, and we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling. So the university calendar, this is also managed by our office. This is actually a Drupal website at this point. Again, it's managed by us, Marketing Creative Services. There are two things that you're going to want to do if you need to request for new access to be created and access for previous employees to be revoked. For the new access, you'll want to, there's a form on the site to request a calendar administrator account, so you'll want to go to that. You can also click on the link in this presentation. And then you'll also want to email onlinestrategy@gw.edu to ask to have access revoked for the previous employee. So again, go to calendar.gwu.edu, and there under the, I believe it's under Submit an Event, there's a link directly to requesting a calendar administrator account. So that's what you'll want to do for anybody who needs new access to the back end of the calendar. And this is going to be based off of your GW Net ID, by the way. And then for the person who no longer should have access, you'll want to email onlinestrategy@gwu.edu and let us know what their Net ID is so that we can go ahead and have their account blocked from the back end of the site. So the University Bulletin, this is actually a third-party application, and it's managed by Academic Planning and Assessment. So you'll want to reach out to them at bulletin@gw.edu. Let them know that the person who was previously managing this process for you is no longer at the university, or at least no longer in that role. So you need to have their access removed. And then you'll want to provide them the information for the employee who will now be taking over that role. So again, that's Academic Planning and Assessment, and you'll want to reach them by contacting bulletin@gwu.edu. And so finally, moving into external services, all of us have to use some of these third-party services to keep a good, cohesive, and comprehensive hold of our communication channels within our office. You will typically in these cases have to contact the vendor. These are some of the most common ones that we deal with at the university. So looking first at Site Improve, this is a website quality assurance tool that the university offers to all site owners at the university. So for instance, it can give you reports on broken links, misspellings, outdated references for things, as well as improper formatting. So by that I mean if you have someone's name who you need to take off of the website, you can actually run a report looking for that name across your website, and then you can make those edits as necessary instead of having to like hunt and peck manually for all of those pages. Similarly, there are policies in there to look for proper formatting. So like for instance, the format of phone numbers, making sure that they're in line with the visual identity standards and guidelines for the university. You can make sure that all phone numbers are in their properties. So that's what Site Improve will allow you to do. It allows you to improve the quality of the content on your website. So access to this is managed by our team, Marketing and Creative Services. So you'll want to reach out to us at onlinestrategy@gw.edu. In that email, let us know who needs to have access and to which sites. And then for anyone who no longer needs to have access, let us know that as well. You can just provide us with their name and their Net ID or their email address, and we'll be able to find their account and remove their access. And for those new employees, we'll just need their name and their email address as well. Next is Emma. This is the university's official mass email service. Access to this is actually managed by GW Information Technology. We provide a lot of training around it, so a lot of people think we also provide access to it, but we do not. It's managed by GW Information Technology. you will need to go to their website, it.gw.edu, and you'll want to go to services and then web and I believe it's web and collaboration, and then there will be a tab for email, for mass email, and there's a form there called the mass email account request form. I've got it linked here as well, but if you go to their website, that's where you'll want to go. You can also email ithelp@gw.edu, and you'll want to use the form to request new access for an employee who needs to start managing your email marketing campaign within Emma. And then you'll want to use the email address, ithelp@gw.edu, to request for access for a previous employee to be revoked. So something to keep in mind when you're requesting access and when you're also having requesting access to be taken away. The way that accounts work in Emma is your personal account will be added to the service, but then you will be added to a team. And you need to make sure that you let IT know what that team is and if there's already one pre-existing, because if they're not aware of the fact that there's a pre-existing team, they might create a new one, a duplicate one, so to speak. And if there are previous emails that you need to get access to, you're not going to be able to because you're in a completely different team. So if your office has ever used Emma to send out email accounts, let them know you need to be added to the team for whatever your office is. That way you'll also be able to access that history of all of the emails that have gone out previously. You'll be able to access all of the email accounts that are in your office's email list, and be able to continue managing your email marketing campaigns appropriately. And then the same thing for if someone needs to be taken out. Just let them know this person is in this team for our office and they no longer are managing this role, so we need to have their access taken away. So talking about social media kind of at large, this one, it's going to come down to the office or department that runs that account. So let's just take Twitter for demonstrative purposes. You need to document what that username is and what that password is and what the email address is for the account. And when it comes to the email address, we cannot stress enough how important it is to not have an individual's email address tied to the account. As much as possible, use an organizational GW email address. So for instance, we have online strategy at gw.edu, and we use that across most of our social media accounts. If you can't do that for some reason, if you need to use like a gmail.com, set up an office Gmail account. So we have GW online strategy at gmail.com for that reason. That way, if your social media account manager ever leaves their role, you still have access to the email address that's tied to that account. It's not tied to that one specific employee. If it is tied to a specific employee, it becomes exponentially harder to have ownership transferred over, because Twitter needs to protect the privacy of the account owner. So they're not just going to say, okay, well, if you say it's yours now and they don't work there anymore, we'll just give it to you. They're going to try and go through the steps of reaching out to that person to say, somebody said that they own this. Can you confirm? Will you approve it? And it can get a lot harder, especially if that account has been deactivated, if it's no longer an active employee at the university and a non-working email address. So as much as possible, like I said, use an organizational GW email address or a gmail.com that's been set up for the office. Have that be the email address on the account, and then document that username and password, because you don't want that that information to be lost with the person who's no longer in that role. We don't have any authority or any mechanism even to get that back for you if it has not been documented. Similarly with Google Analytics, a lot of people will come to us thinking that we can just give access to a Google Analytics account, and we cannot. That is also tied specifically to the office that has created that Google Analytics account and who runs that Google Analytics account. What we can do is provide some high-level reports because we monitor the whole gw.edu domain, but for like the individual offices, we don't monitor all of those, and we don't have access to all of the individual accounts that have been created within those various offices to pull those types of reports and manage the Google Analytics accounts for those offices. So document the username and the password, but most importantly, with Google Analytics, it has to be a gmail.com account. It cannot be an @gw.edu email address. It has to be an @gmail.com email address. So just like with social media accounts, try and create an office Gmail email address. So we have our gwonlinestrategy@gmail.com address, which is what we use for Google services where we cannot use our @gw.edu email address. With Google Analytics, it's nearly impossible, to my knowledge, to have ownership of a Google Analytics account that's tied to a specific person's email address transferred once they no longer are in that role and managing that information for you. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's pretty hard, and that's because Google's trying to maintain, again, the privacy and the integrity of the privacy of that account owner. So if you're unable to, if unfortunately the account was created using an individual's Gmail account and you don't have access to it, more often than not, you're going to have to create a new analytics account, and unfortunately you will lose the historical analytics attached to the previous account. You'll only be able to get anything from the day you create the new account forward. So it's of utmost importance that these analytics accounts are created using an office, quote-unquote, Gmail account and not an individual's email account. And then as far as other non-GW websites and domain services like GoDaddy and Google Domains and WordPress and all of that, this is another one where you need to be documenting the credentials for these accounts, and as much as possible not signing up for them with an individual employee's email address, using those org GW email addresses or an office Gmail account. If you do not have that information, you're going to have to reach out to the respective vendor to find out what can be done. Depending on the service and the vendor's policies, you might be able to regain access to it, but we can't guarantee that. When it comes to things like DNS for domains, I know that there are some processes in place with some of the domain hosts, and in those cases you can reach out to GW Information Technology for assistance. They don't have the authority to force ownership to be transferred, but they do have some history with working through those processes, so they might be able to help you along. And in those cases, they'll typically recommend that GWIT become the owner of the domain name so that they can maintain that account moving forward for as long as necessary. And that way it's, again, not tied to an individual person, it's tied to the university as an organization, and so we have a lot more control from that point. So again, you'll have to reach out to the vendors directly. There will typically be a support page or something in their footer with support contact information that you'll need to access, and then you'll need to ask them, who owns the account and what the process is to have ownership transferred if the account is associated with that individual employee as opposed to being associated with your office. And then depending on what they say from there, you can ask them, you can reach out to GW Information Technology, let them know the situation that you're encountering, and see if they're able to provide any assistance to help move the process along. But again, they do not have the authority to force it. They just have some prior experience in facilitating these types of situations. So that's really all that I have for you guys today, but one other thing I'll mention that when I canvassed my office for things kind of falling under this umbrella topic that was mentioned to me is when it comes to emails and calendar requests, if the person who is leaving their role is also the owner of like a repeating calendar invite, maybe for a weekly check-in or of some sort, something along those lines, make sure those get deleted before they leave their role, especially if they are no longer going to have any affiliation with university, because those can't be deleted by anybody else. And so what you'll find is that people who are on that previous invite will continue to get notifications saying such and such meeting is coming up when it's really no longer coming up, and they just can't get it off their calendar. So it prevents a little bit of a frustration for everybody. So it's a good idea to just delete those before that person leaves their role. And for org email addresses, those can be reassigned. Ownership of those can be reassigned if necessary. You'll just need to reach out to the IT support center for that. So again, just go to it.gw.edu. Email ithelp@gw.edu or call 202-994-4948 to regain access to an org email account if the previous person who was managing that is no longer in that role. So thank you so much for joining me today. That's everything I have for you. If there is a service here that you have more questions about, feel free to reach out to us, onlinestrategy@gw.edu. If there's a service that we did not mention and you need to know how to have ownership transferred, I recommend actually reaching out to IT. So ithelp@gw.edu to kind of find out what steps and processes you would need to take to have ownership transferred in the case that the person who was managing it previously is no longer in their role. So I thank you all and have a great afternoon.